Hello, everyone. Today we are going to hear the story of Alyssa Grant, a woman who did something that seemed very small, yet caused an entire glamorous spectacle to collapse within just a few minutes. Right after signing the divorce papers at D.C. Superior Court, Alyssa did not cry, did not argue, and did not look back. The very first thing she did was open her phone and cancel all 15 supplementary credit cards issued under the name of her ex-husband, Calvin Grant. And at that exact moment, somewhere else in the city, Calvin was enthusiastically discussing plans with an event manager to book a $75,000 luxury engagement party for his mistress, Monique Ellis, at the Willard Intercontinental, one of the most prestigious and luxurious hotels in Washington, D.C. But wait, what Calvin did not know was this. In just a few minutes, a single sentence, not spoken by Alyssa, but by the event manager, would cause his entire plan, his pride, and the carefully constructed image of success he had spent years building to collapse on the spot. And this is not just a story about a divorce. This is the journey of a woman who spent many years walking in silence, until one day she calmly straightened her back and reclaimed her own voice, through the law, through preparation, and through the truth. In every person's life there are crossroads we never wish to reach, and divorce, perhaps, is one of the sharpest pains of all. After 20 long years of giving everything to my family, the only thing I, Alyssa Grant, was holding tightly in my hands at that moment was a thin piece of paper, a divorce certificate, a sheet so light, yet carrying an entire lifetime of endurance, hurt, and bitterness. But what makes this story different from most divorces is not tears nor desperate pleas. Everything truly began the moment Calvin Grant, my ex-husband, hurried into the car waiting for him, where his mistress was already seated, and turned his back on me, the woman who had shared half of his life. When the car door closed, I did not scream. I did not collapse. There was only a terrifying silence, the silence of an iceberg that had endured for far too long, and the first cracks had begun to form. But to understand why that moment mattered so much, we need to turn back time, 20 years earlier. In 2003, at a charity gala hosted by the Howard University Alumni Association, I, then still Alyssa Thompson, a 25-year-old woman who had just earned her MBA, met Calvin Grant. He was a young, ambitious entrepreneur with a confident smile and grand plans for the future. During our first dance, Calvin leaned down and said to me, "Do you believe in the power of building a legacy? Not just money, but a name our children and grandchildren will be proud of." At that moment, I believed him. I believed in the sincerity in his eyes. I believed in his passionate voice. I believed in the promise of a happy family. And most importantly, I believed I had found a man worthy of wagering my entire life on. Our wedding took place in the fall of 2004 at Washington National Cathedral. I wore an ivory wedding gown, holding a bouquet of white lilies, walking down the aisle beneath shimmering candlelight. Calvin stood at the altar, his eyes glistening as he watched me approach. "Do you promise to stand by him in wealth or poverty, in sickness and in health?" the priest asked. "I do," I answered, my voice trembling with happiness. The early years truly felt like a dream. Calvin founded Grant Building Supplies, and I, with my MBA, gave up an opportunity to work at a major consulting firm in order to stand beside my husband and build his business. I handled accounting, managed inventory, negotiated with suppliers, even drove delivery trucks when necessary. "I couldn't do this without you," Calvin often said, during nights when we sat at the dining table reviewing business plans beside cups of long cold coffee. I still remember one winter night in 2007 when the company landed its first major contract. Calvin hugged me tightly, lifted me up, and spun me around the small living room. "You're my lucky angel, Alyssa. We're going to build an empire." I believed him. Everything began to change in 2012. Calvin's mother, Loretta Grant, moved in with us after suffering a heart attack. I welcomed her with the devotion of a dutiful daughter-in-law, preparing a first-floor bedroom, organizing her medication, caring for her as if she were my own mother. One afternoon, as I was peeling apples for her, Loretta held my hand and said, "My dear, I know you've sacrificed so much for this family. I will never forget that." But just 3 months later, I accidentally overheard a phone call between her and Vanessa, Calvin's sister. "I told you he needs to find another wife. It's been 8 years and still no grandchildren. The Grant bloodline will end." I stood frozen outside the door, my hands trembling as I held a tray of still hot tea. Inside, my heart screamed. It wasn't that I didn't want children. It was that I couldn't. The medical tests, the nights of silent crying, the times I turned away when I saw others holding newborns, none of it was enough to earn understanding. And Calvin, he never stood up for me. "Mom's old. Sometimes she doesn't mean what she says. Don't take it personally," was all he said, coldly. I swallowed everything I wanted to say. I told myself, I'm his wife. I must endure his family. Vanessa later moved nearby with her 9-year-old son. No stable job, living off welfare and family support. I lent Vanessa money, $500, $1,000, for tuition, car repairs, clothes. "I'll pay you back as soon as I get next month's assistance," she always said. But next month never came. And when I gently reminded her, Vanessa replied, "We're family. Do you really need to count every penny?" I stayed silent again, and that silence fed their contempt. In 2015, Grant Building Supplies had grown enough to hire 3 full-time employees. Calvin told me, "You don't need to come to the company every day anymore. I have staff now." That sentence felt like a piece of my identity being ripped away. "But Calvin, this company, it's mine," he cut me off. "You helped me. I appreciate it. But now I need someone more professional." More professional. A woman with an MBA from Howard University, deemed unprofessional. I didn't argue. I simply nodded and walked out of the office I had built through countless sleepless nights. From then on, Calvin came home later and later. He said he was meeting clients, partners, networking. I believed him, or forced myself to. Sometimes we don't realize how much we've lost, until one day, even when we need it most, there is no one left beside us. And that moment came to me on a winter night. One night in 2018, I had a fever of 39 degrees Celsius. Shaking, I called Calvin. "Calvin, I have a really high fever. Can you buy some fever medicine and come home?" "I'm busy," he replied irritably. "Just order delivery. I'm with an important client." I lay alone, drenched in sweat. I ordered the medicine myself, went downstairs myself to receive it. "Are you okay? Is there no one at home to help you?" the delivery driver asked. I shook my head and gave a weak smile. That night I thought, I had given up my career, my dreams, my friends, only to become a shadow in my own home. Yet I still didn't leave, because of love, or rather, habit. February 14th, 2022, Valentine's Day. I woke up early and prepared a special breakfast: Eggs Benedict, Colombian coffee, a heart-shaped cake. I wrote a card. 20 years together. You are still the love of my life. Calvin barely glanced at it. "I'm not hungry," he said, and walked out. That afternoon, I brought the sweater he'd forgotten at home to his office, and in the warehouse behind the building, I saw Calvin holding a young woman, a tight red dress, curly hair, a sparkling necklace. "Baby, I love you. I love you too." The paper bag fell to the floor. Calvin turned around. Frozen, I ran, home, holding Whiskers, my loyal old cat. That night, Calvin said, "I don't feel anything for you anymore. I want a divorce." I looked at him and said, "Fine, but don't think I'll let you and your family trample on me ever again." I met Sharon Price at Busboys and Poets. My friend held my hand. "Now you're taking yourself back, and I'm here." The lawyer asked, "Do you have evidence?" I opened the storage box, ledgers, receipts, bank statements, and I discovered the money Calvin had transferred to Monique Ellis, more than $40,000 from our joint account, plus $35,000 withdrawn from the company to pay off gambling debts. He hadn't just cheated. He had betrayed both his family and his business. Every discovery was a stab, but also a step forward. I would not let him walk away. April 2024. I stood on the steps of D.C. Superior Court, gripping the divorce file that still felt warm in my hands. A cold wind lashed across my face. My thin coat wasn't enough, but inside me something burned. Something heavy that had pressed down on me for years was finally being lifted off my shoulders. Not because I had defeated anyone, but because I knew I was free. Calvin walked faster than I did. The paperwork had barely been finalized when he spun away, climbed into a black Mercedes parked right at the curb, as if even 1 second of delay would force him to face me one more time. He didn't roll the window down. Through the tinted glass, I caught a glimpse of a young woman in a pink coat in the passenger seat. I didn't need to guess. It was Monique Ellis. Strangely, I wasn't angry. I just felt light. 20 years of marriage, from hope to shattering, ended today. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. In the past, Calvin said he needed liquidity for business, pushed me to open a primary credit card in my name, then add supplementary cards for him and his family to use. I had done what I'd done for 20 years. Obey. A total of 15 supplementary cards. 1 card for Calvin, 1 card for Vanessa, 1 card for Loretta, 2 cards for Calvin's drinking buddies. The remaining 10 cards for those trusted suppliers. I went into the card management section. Everything still showed active. I paused on the card Calvin used the most, ending in 8886, the one he used to laugh and call lucky. But just last month, that card had bought Monique a $3,500 Gucci bag, a $1,200 pair of Louboutins, a $5,800 Tiffany necklace, more than $10,000 in a single month. I tapped cancel. The system asked for confirmation. I confirmed immediately. Then I kept going. Vanessa's card, canceled. Loretta's card, canceled. The drinking buddies' cards, canceled. My phone kept vibrating. Ping, ping, ping. Each ping sounded like a chain being cut. By the 15th card, the screen displayed, all 15 supplementary cards have been successfully canceled. For the first time in years, I truly smiled. I felt like I had taken the steering wheel of my life back. I had no idea. Somewhere else in the city, Calvin was preparing the most generous performance of his life, completely unaware that I had just pulled the plug on that stage. Right then, WhatsApp showed a voice message from Sharon Price. Her voice was excited. A regular customer from the fashion store where she worked was the event director at the Willard Intercontinental. That person had just seen Calvin booking an engagement party with a young woman, insisting on a $75,000 event on the 18th. I laughed. Too perfect. I messaged Sharon back calmly. Thanks, and you'll see. Today he won't even be able to pay the deposit, because the cards he plans to use, I just canceled every single one. I shoved the paperwork into my bag and headed home. My steps felt as light as feathers. On the way, I stopped and bought a bag of honey-roasted nuts. The warmth from the bag seeped into my palms, then straight down into the deepest part of me. I promised myself, from now on, I would live for me. But the peace didn't last 30 minutes. When I got home, violent knocking erupted, followed by Vanessa's shrill voice. "Alyssa, open the door right now. You think hiding in there is the end of it?" I wiped my hands and walked over, but I didn't open it immediately. Vanessa screamed that Calvin was being humiliated at the hotel because none of the cards worked. If I didn't fix it right now, I would regret it. I opened the door. Vanessa stood there arrogantly. A loud floral dress, frizzy hair, heavy makeup, deep red lipstick, and a glittering bag in her hand. I recognized it instantly, a Michael Kors bag worth $850, something I had seen on last month's statement. She barged in, threw the bag onto the sofa. The metal chain clanged sharply against the table, startling Whiskers, who bolted under the chair. Vanessa planted her hands on her hips. "Are you insane? Who canceled all the supplementary cards if not you?" I crossed my arms. "Yes, I canceled them. So what?" She screamed, saying they'd used those cards for years, saying I was cruel, saying I had made Calvin look like a fool in front of everyone. I didn't argue emotionally. I went into my home office and retrieved the original agreement for issuing supplementary cards, something I had always kept as a survival instinct. I set it down and pointed to the line. The primary cardholder was Alyssa Grant, and supplementary card privileges were controlled by the primary holder. Vanessa read it, still trying to deny it. "Fake contract." I opened my banking app and held it right up to her face. "The primary cardholder is still me. If he transferred ownership, tell him to show the statement proving it." Vanessa went silent, then switched to moral lecturing. I had to think about Calvin's reputation. He was about to start a new life. I stared straight at her. Did he think about my reputation when he booked a $75,000 engagement party with his mistress? When he transferred our shared assets away? Vanessa's eyes went red. Suddenly she grabbed a cup on the table like she was about to throw it. I pointed straight to the door. "Don't. I will call the police immediately. Let them decide whether my crime is canceling my own cards or your crime is breaking into my house and threatening me." Her hand froze. Finally, Vanessa snatched her bag and stomped her foot. "You'll see. I'm telling my mother. She won't let you get away with this." She stormed out. The door slammed so hard the wall shook and a framed picture tilted crooked. I stared at the dented doorknob, tightening my grip on the cup. Vanessa was gone, which meant Loretta would come, and I knew the trouble had only begun. Less than 30 minutes later, the knocking came again, rhythmic, steady, but heavy as a hammer. I was stroking Whiskers when I knew immediately Loretta Grant. She stood outside, her voice soft but commanding, like velvet wrapped around a blade. "My dear, open the door. I came to talk calmly." I unlatched it. The moment the door cracked open, she pushed her way in. She wore the moss-green knit coat I had given her, a gray scarf, and carried a heavy cloth bag. She walked straight in without taking off her shoes, leaving muddy streaks on the floor I had just cleaned. She dropped the bag onto the table with a hard thud, and a few apples rolled out. She sat down heavily on the exact spot I usually sat, patting the armrest. "Alyssa, come here. I'm speaking seriously." She scolded me for canceling the cards and forcing Calvin to beg at the hotel, then launched into the familiar song. Calvin made mistakes. But what young man doesn't? After 20 years together, how could there be no feelings left? And what I did would destroy the image of a businessman. I frowned and made it clear. The cards were in my name. I had the right to cancel them. If Calvin cared about his reputation, he shouldn't use my cards to buy gifts for his mistress, shouldn't book a $75,000 party, and shouldn't transfer our shared assets away. Loretta slammed her hand on the table, then said the sentence that made my blood flare. Calvin being happy with a young woman was something I should accept. And besides, after 20 years of me not giving him a child, if he had a healthy baby boy with Monique, it would be a blessing, and I should be understanding. I stood up, went into my office, and brought out the evidence file I had prepared, receipts, ledgers, invoices, and the transfers Calvin sent to his mistress. I placed it directly in front of her. Last winter, I had a 39-degree fever and asked him to buy medicine. He said he was busy, but on that same day he transferred $150 to her to buy things. On Mother's Day, I bought him a sweater for over $80 and was criticized for it being expensive and forced to return it, but that same day, he bought her a necklace for nearly $700. The startup capital for the shop, $3,000, was contributed by my family. I worked for years keeping the books, but he transferred money from the shop into his personal account, totaling more than $75,000, and half of it was mine. Loretta's face went pale, but she still tried to force me. "Turn the cards back on. You must listen to me. If Calvin gets shocked and falls ill, you'll be responsible." I gave a cold laugh. Her pension of $600 had been poured into Calvin and Vanessa for years. She had saved painfully while Calvin supported his mistress with my money. And now she wanted me to restore the cards so they could keep using them? Loretta choked, then pulled out her usual move, throwing herself onto the floor, crying loudly to draw the neighbors out to watch. This time, I calmly opened the door a crack. If you want the neighbors to watch, I'll open the door wide. Let everyone decide. Is my crime canceling my own cards, or is Calvin's crime cheating and transferring our shared assets away? The crying stopped instantly. She glanced outside, afraid the entire neighborhood would find out. She stood up, brushed off her clothes, and said coldly, "You've gotten brave. You'll see. Calvin won't forgive you." She shoved me as she passed, then slammed the door. I locked it, looked at the apples rolling on the floor and the file on the table, and exhaled slowly. My heart was still trembling, but I knew I couldn't back down. 20 years of humiliation was enough. I picked up the apples and put the file back exactly where it belonged. Whiskers crept over and rubbed against my leg. I lifted him up and whispered, "Don't be afraid. Mom's here now." I knew it clearly. After my mother-in-law, Calvin, would come, the trouble would be long. But I was prepared. No matter what tricks they tried, I would not let myself be dragged back the way I used to be. I would take back what belonged to me, and I would make them pay. That afternoon, I called Sharon Price and told her everything about Loretta coming to my house to cause chaos. On the other end of the line, Sharon let out a few curses that were not ladylike at all, then said bluntly, "Alyssa, don't worry. If they keep harassing you, call me. I'll come right away." And my lawyer told me, "I've reached him. Are you free tomorrow? We'll go together. Let the lawyer see the receipts and see if there's a way to get back the assets Calvin stole from you." Those words felt like a firm hand landing on my shoulder. Not loud, but enough to make me feel less alone. For the first time, I understood. I didn't have to fight by myself anymore. After I hung up, I stepped onto the balcony, watched the sun slide down toward the horizon, and let out a long breath. The road ahead would be thorny, but this time, I was walking it for me. I went back inside, picked up the apples Loretta had dropped. Some were bruised, still edible after washing. I set them on a plate to dry. Whiskers curled at my feet, occasionally rubbing his head against my pant leg, silent, as if he, too, knew a storm had just passed through this house. Right then, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my hand pause. Calvin. I stood still for exactly one beat. I knew if his mother and sister couldn't do anything, then the next one would definitely be him. I picked up the phone, but didn't answer right away. I turned on the recorder first. Only when the red dot blinked did I accept the call. "Alyssa, have you lost your mind?" Calvin roared, his voice harsh. I could even hear traffic outside. "Did you cancel 15 supplementary cards?" I leaned back against the sofa, gently stroking Whiskers' back so he wouldn't startle. "Yes, I canceled them. So what?" He exploded. He described what happened at the hotel, swiping 7 or 8 cards and none went through, the manager looking at him like a beggar, the girl beside him pushing him nonstop. He screamed that I was humiliating him on purpose because I couldn't stand seeing him happy. I let out a small laugh. "Happy how? Booking a $75,000 engagement party with your mistress? Using my card to buy a $3,500 bag and a $500 necklace for her? Transferring more than $75,000 from the company into your personal account? Do you remember? Half of that is mine." Calvin cut in, panicked and furious. He'd used those cards for years, like they were his. I had to warn him before canceling them. Did I have any feelings left at all? "Feelings?" I repeated, finding it more ridiculous than painful. "When I caught you holding your mistress in the warehouse, did you think about feelings? When I had a 39-degree fever and asked you to buy medicine, you said you were busy, then took her to a restaurant. Did you think about feelings? It's too late, Calvin." He went silent for a few seconds, then his voice turned into a threat. "Turn the cards back on, or you'll regret it. Your receipts won't do anything. The divorce is done. Don't dream of getting one more penny." I didn't interrupt. I let him talk until he was finished, the red dot of the recording still blinking like a small eye staring straight at the truth. When he stopped, I answered slowly, "Whether the division is done or not is not up to you. I've hired a lawyer. Tomorrow, I'm meeting the lawyer. Then we'll see whether the money you transferred out and the money you spent on my cards counts as marital property. And I'm not turning the cards back on. The cards are in my name. Who I allow to use them is my decision. Who do you think you are?" "A lawyer?" His voice wavered. Then he threw his final threat, using Loretta's mouth. "If you don't turn the cards back on, we'll come to your house every day and make a scene. Let the whole neighborhood know what kind of witch you are. Let's see if you still dare step outside." I curled my lip. "Then come. Last time I didn't call the police because I still respected you. Next time you people show up again, I will call 911. Then we'll see who's more ashamed, me for canceling my own cards, or your family for showing up to cause trouble." The line went dead silent. Then came a heavy clunk, like he slammed the phone against something, followed by a frenzy of wild cursing. "Alyssa, you witch! I must have been blind to marry you. This isn't over. I won't let you live in peace." If I were the old me, I probably would have shaken. But then, I only felt relieved. The louder he yelled, the more certain I became of one thing. He had run out of reason. I glanced at the recording length. Over 3 minutes. Enough. I ended the call, saved the file as "threatening call from Calvin," and uploaded it to the cloud. I drank a sip of warm water to drown the lingering chill in my nerves. Whiskers jumped onto the sofa, curled into the spot where I had been sitting, his tail flicking softly. I went out onto the balcony. The sky was fully dark now. The neighbors were still laughing and talking calmly, as if their homes had never seen a storm. And suddenly I found it funny. In the past, I feared Calvin's anger. I kept yielding for the sake of peace. The result was betrayal and emptiness. But now, when I wasn't afraid anymore, he couldn't do anything to me. I thought that call would be the worst thing in my day. But I didn't know that tonight someone else would come for me, not with shouting like Calvin, but with glittering photos, flashy numbers, and a provocative voice. Right then, Sharon texted on WhatsApp, "Tomorrow 10 o'clock at the lawyer's office, okay?" I replied immediately, "Yes, perfect." I told her Calvin had just threatened me and sent the audio file to Sharon. She responded right away, "Good job. Keep recording. With this, he won't dare threaten you carelessly. Tomorrow we meet the lawyer. There will definitely be a way to recover the money he stole." I texted back, "I'm not afraid. I have you." I organized every receipt and document, packed them neatly into my bag for tomorrow. No mistakes allowed. I cooked a simple dinner with vegetables and eggs. The smell of hot soup made the kitchen feel less cold. I gave Whiskers a piece of egg. He ate happily. While I was eating, my phone went ping. A friend request on social media. The username Monique.e. The profile picture showed a woman in heavy makeup, a bright necklace around her neck. I didn't need to guess. The mistress. The message attached was arrogant. "I'm Calvin's fiancé. I have a few things I want to say to you. Accept me." I laughed contemptuously. Whiskers rubbed against my hand. I patted his head, then clicked accept. Fine. Let's see what she wants to say. The moment I accepted, she sent a string of photos, a hotel ballroom with overwhelming chandeliers, her selfie in a long wedding gown with a sparkling diamond ring, a photo of her holding Calvin in front of the banquet menu. Then she sent a long message dripping with pride. Calvin would spend $75,000, her wedding dress would cost over $20,000, the ring would be $18,000, and she mocked that I probably had never seen luxury like that in 20 years. I lifted a spoonful of soup and replied calmly, "Beautiful, but I'm just wondering, are you paying or is Calvin paying? If Calvin is paying, you should be careful. Yesterday he called me in despair because he couldn't even pay the deposit, swiping 7 or 8 cards and none of them went through. Do you really believe he has $75,000? She immediately snapped back. I was jealous. Calvin was rich. I smiled, then sent her a photo of the bank statement I had saved. Look, on this day, he transferred money to you. On that day, the note says, "For the bag." All of it is marital property between us. And by the way, the supplementary cards are canceled. He won't be able to use them anymore." She started defending herself. I was obsessed with the past, interfering, still dreaming of getting back with Calvin. I typed one short, cold sentence. "I'm only reminding you, don't flaunt a luxury wedding with someone else's money. If you're not careful, you'll end up with no money, no wedding, and nothing at all." I hit a nerve. She fired off a stream of crude insults. I didn't argue. I screenshot everything, saved it in the evidence folder, then sent copies to Sharon. A few seconds later, a notification appeared. "This user has removed you from their friends list." I looked at it, exhaled, set the phone down, and took another spoonful of soup. The soup was still hot. The warmth slid down my throat, comforting me in a very ordinary way. I gave Whiskers the last piece of egg. He ate it with satisfaction. Sharon texted immediately, with a steaming face icon. "What is wrong with that girl? She doesn't know who she just messed with." I replied, "Not worth my time." But I saved all the screenshots. Tomorrow, I'll show the lawyer. I washed the dishes and checked my bag again. Receipts, statements, Calvin's audio threat, Monique's chat screenshots, nothing missing. I sat down on the sofa and turned on the TV for a bit, and strangely, I felt peaceful. Calvin wouldn't give up easily. Loretta and Vanessa might come back, but now I had evidence. I had Sharon. I had a lawyer. And most importantly, I finally had the courage to stand on my own side. Right before turning off the light, I looked at Whiskers, half asleep on the sofa, and thought to myself, this time, no matter what they try, I will face it, and I will live 100 times better than before. I woke up at 6 in the morning. Actually, calling it waking up isn't accurate, because I barely slept. All night I tossed and turned, and inside my head, Calvin's voice, Vanessa's voice, Loretta's voice, kept replaying over and over, like a haunting choir that refused to stop. I jolted up, went straight to the living room, and opened my bag to check everything again. Last night, after the conversation with Monique Ellis, I had printed all the screenshots and stacked them neatly with the receipts and the audio files I already had. I was afraid of missing even one tiny detail, because all it would take was a single gap, and Calvin would twist the entire story. Whiskers, my old cat, kept pacing back and forth around the living room. Every so often he rubbed his head against my hand like a quiet form of encouragement, as if he were saying, "You're doing the right thing. Keep going." At 7, I locked the door, slung my bag over my shoulder, and stepped outside. I had arranged to meet Sharon Price at the street corner. She was already there, wearing her familiar red coat, holding 2 warm breakfast sandwiches. The moment she saw me, Sharon immediately handed one over. "Eat. In a minute you'll be meeting the lawyer, and you'll have to talk a lot. If you're hungry, you won't have the strength." I took a bite. The hot, rustic ham flavor spread through my mouth, salty in just the right way. And strangely, that warmth made me feel still alive, still standing. "I really don't know anyone like you," I breathed out. "With this whole pile of paperwork, I even forgot to eat breakfast." "Always daydreaming." Sharon shook her head. "If you want to face people like that, the first thing you do is take care of yourself. The lawyer I found for you is trustworthy. He specializes in property disputes after divorce. Last year he handled the neighbor's case and made them return everything they stole." We walked to Busboys and Poets, a familiar cafe for D.C.'s intellectual crowd, where people read, write, and debate politics and art. The place wasn't big, but it was clean. Photos of civil rights activists and quotes about justice covered the walls. Just looking at those words, I felt my back straighten a little more. The lawyer was waiting at a corner table. He was in his early 40s, wore glasses, and had a calm face. When we walked in, he stood up right away, pulled out chairs, and invited us to sit. "Please, have a seat, drink some water, and then tell me everything calmly." I handed him my bag. My hand unconsciously clenched into a fist, not because I wanted to hit anyone, but because I was trying to keep myself from trembling. "Everything I've collected is in here," I said. "Household spending receipts, the bookkeeping for the building supply business, and proof of the transfers he made to his mistress." The lawyer opened the bag and reviewed each item very slowly, very carefully. From time to time, he underlined a few lines. At our table, there was nothing left but the sound of paper turning, while Sharon and I stayed silent as if we were waiting for results in an operating room. About 30 minutes later, the lawyer set the documents down, adjusted his glasses, and looked at me. "You prepared very well, especially the business records. These are extremely important evidence because they document all income and expenses. You said he transferred $75,000. According to these records, from mid-May to October last year, he made a total of 5 transfers into his personal account, $15,000 each time. That's exactly $75,000. He continued, his voice firm. These transfers happened before the divorce, so they are marital property. Making unilateral transfers without the spouse's consent is clearly wrong." My stomach tightened, but this time it was because of hope. "So I can recover that money?" I asked quickly. "I've heard of people who proved it, but in the end, still couldn't get anything back." "You will recover it," the lawyer replied decisively. "The chain of evidence is very strong, the records are clear, and the transfer trail into his personal account is clear. There's almost no room to deny it." Then he flipped to more pages. "Not only $75,000, I also see that from the beginning of last year, he made smaller transfers from $700 to $1,500 each time, totaling over $7,000. That needs to be included as well. And the items he bought for the mistress using your supplementary card. If we can prove those were expenditures for her, you have the right to demand reimbursement for the corresponding portion." Hearing that, it felt like the stone on my chest finally shifted. Sharon exhaled in relief and patted my hand lightly. "See? I told you," the lawyer continued. "The next step is obtaining full information from his personal accounts, the bank, the account numbers, and the mistress's receiving account. I will request a court order, so the bank must provide it directly. You also need to list other marital assets, house, car, deposits, investments. Everything must be clear. Nothing can slip through." I replied, "The house is in both our names. The car was bought 2 years ago and is in his name. As for other savings, whenever I asked before, he said there were no savings, that everything went into the business. Now I'm certain he's hiding money." The lawyer nodded. "The house and the car are marital property. They must be split 50-50. As for hidden funds, if we can get statements, I can follow the money trail. Don't worry, the law is on your side. He cannot escape." I took out my phone and showed him the screenshots of Calvin's personal account and Monique Ellis's account number, taken from their messages. The lawyer glanced quickly, then nodded firmly. "Very useful. With this information, the process will be faster. Today, I will file the request for an investigative court order as soon as possible. Once we have results, we can file suit and demand repayment." At that moment, I still didn't know. Calvin would not wait for the court order before acting. He would change his voice, change his face, play the role of the regretful man, staging a meeting that looked like reconciliation, but was actually a trap to make me sign away my rights. And right here at Busboys and Poets, where justice had just strengthened me, I would also see his true face more clearly than ever. Near noon, we thanked the lawyer and left the cafe. Outside, the sunlight felt warm. I realized I was breathing more lightly. Before, every time I faced Calvin, I felt alone and powerless. But now, I understood. As long as I didn't let go, as long as I had friends and the law behind me, I could get through anything. When I got home after the cafe meeting, I carried the evidence file that had been organized perfectly. Whiskers ran out to greet me, rubbed against my leg, and meowed. I put the groceries away in the kitchen and poured food into his bowl. Watching him eat, the irritation from Calvin's ridiculous performance at the cafe slowly faded. Right then, Sharon Price called. She asked immediately, "How did the meeting with your ex-husband go? Did he try anything?" I told her everything. Calvin trying to act kind to lure me into giving up assets, then falling silent and fleeing in humiliation when the lawyer laid out the evidence. Sharon laughed loudly. "He deserved it." Then Sharon added something extremely important. She had a regular customer at the clothing store, an event manager at the Willard Intercontinental, the exact person responsible for Calvin's engagement party. Sharon asked if I wanted to know any details. I hesitated a little because I worried exposing customer information could cause trouble. But Sharon reassured me. The manager was very sympathetic when he heard Calvin had cheated and transferred assets. He even said bluntly, "Men like that need to be taught a lesson." Sharon had scheduled a meeting for me tomorrow at 3 p.m. with him at a tea shop near the hotel. The next day, I arrived 10 minutes early and sat at a table near the window. The manager walked in wearing hotel uniform, average build, glasses, calm expression. I stood up to greet him. "Hello, I'm Sharon's friend." He went straight to the point. He said he would help within what regulations allowed, then gave me information that laid everything out on the table with crystal clarity. Calvin's engagement party was booked on the 18th of last month to be held in the largest ballroom at the Willard Intercontinental. The room could seat 50 tables, $2,000 per table, including venue rental, service, MC, and lighting. The total cost exceeded $75,000. I wrote down every word. I asked about the deposit and the event date. The manager said Calvin had only put down $7,000. By policy, a large event required at least 20% deposit, meaning $15,000. Calvin begged because he was tight on liquidity, and the hotel accepted $7,000 on the promise he would pay the remainder within 1 week. But until now, he still hadn't paid. The party was scheduled for the 18th of this month, 10 days away. Yesterday, the hotel reminded him, and Calvin asked for 3 more days. If he didn't pay by the deadline, he would lose the $7,000 deposit, and the party would be canceled. Listening to this, I felt a cold satisfaction. Calvin didn't have enough to pay the required deposit, yet he still promised his mistress a $75,000 party. As for the guest list, he still hadn't submitted the full list, but he said he would invite more than 300 people, including major clients in the building supply industry, friends, and family. Calvin also demanded prime tables near the head table for Monique Ellis's parents to look impressive. As for the MC, the hotel would provide one. The best MC, highly experienced. The manager said he had placed the MC on alert to coordinate as much as possible without being too obvious because he was still hotel staff. Before leaving, he handed me a copy of the booking contract, complete with signatures, dates, location, and costs, including Calvin's signature. Holding that contract in my hands felt like gripping a key that could tear his mask wide open. I called Sharon and told her every detail. Sharon was thrilled. "Now we know everything. If the party happens, we'll expose him right in front of his clients and friends." I also called the lawyer to ask whether we should strike at the party itself. The lawyer agreed, but warned me to control myself and not disturb hotel order. The best timing would be when the MC asked the couple about vows, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. That would be the moment I stood up and presented the evidence, maximum impact without turning it into a fight. In my mind, the plan was already forming. At the most important moment, I would appear with proof. Cheating, asset transfers, the short deposit, the $75,000 lie. So everyone could see who Calvin truly was. In the days that followed, I started adjusting to my job at an organic grocery store while waiting for the investigative order results. The owner and employees were all kind. They knew I was dealing with something, but they didn't judge. They even made it easier for me to have time to prepare. Every night after I got home, I checked my evidence the way you check ammo before battle. Transfer statements, credit card receipts, the booking contract, the audio recording of Calvin threatening me, the audio recordings of the scandal involving his mother and sister, screenshots of the conversation with the mistress. Nothing was missing. 3 days before the party, the lawyer called. The investigative order had been issued, and they went to the bank to examine Calvin's accounts. Out of the $75,000 Calvin transferred, $40,000 had been sent to Monique Ellis. The remaining $35,000 was used to pay off gambling debts. I froze. So he hadn't just betrayed me. He was also a compulsive gambler, and if this truth came out in front of more than 300 people, it would be humiliation with no way back. I looked at the stack of evidence on the table, my resolve hardening. 3 days from now, Calvin and Monique's happy day would become the day of payment. That day, I was arranging inventory in the store, my hands still damp from washing apples. Following the owner's instructions, I separated the ones with small bruises to sell cheaper to elderly people in the neighborhood. My phone vibrated. Calvin. I knew immediately. He had smelled something. I stepped into a corner and turned on the recorder out of habit. "Alyssa, what are you plotting behind my back?" Calvin shouted, drilling into my ear. In the background, I could also hear the mistresses complaining. Surely they were fighting again over the deposit. "I'm warning you, don't even think about showing up at my party and making a scene. If you dare step into that place, you'll regret it." I leaned against the door frame, watching customers come and go, and deliberately lowered my voice to sound afraid. "What are you talking about? I work at the store every day now. I'm busy to death. Where would I even get time to worry about your business?" Calvin became even more frantic. Someone at the hotel had said somebody was asking about party details. His mother had heard neighbors gossiping that I hired a lawyer to sue. He was afraid I planned to humiliate him at the party. Then he ended with one sentence. "Do you really want this to end that badly?" Inside, I smiled. I sighed as if insulted. "I hired a lawyer to handle the assets, not to ruin your party. The party is your happy day. Why would I ruin it? I'm not going. I have to work." Calvin still didn't trust me and demanded I swear. He even threatened that if I lied, he would come to the store and make a scene so I couldn't work. I pretended to panic, lowering my voice like I was afraid the boss would hear. "It took me so much effort just to get this job. I only want peace. I swear I'm not going." Finally, on the other end, I heard a relieved exhale. I even heard Calvin say to his mistress, "See, she won't come." After I hung up, I saved the recording and sent it to the lawyer and Sharon. Less than 2 minutes later, Sharon called back, swore once, then laughed. "He's really a bastard, and so stupid. Your acting is insane." "I have to act so he relaxes," I said. "So when I suddenly show up, he won't have time to react." Sharon also updated the infiltration plan. On the party day, the hotel manager would have someone meet me, issue me a staff ID card, lead me through the service entrance, and then I would wait in a room behind the ballroom. The MC had been notified in advance. When the vows were asked, the MC would pause and give me a signal, and I would step out. The lawyer messaged on WhatsApp. He would be at the hotel 30 minutes early. If Calvin had someone block me, he would handle it. He also sent me the phone number of the nearest police precinct so I could call any time. The store owner saw me constantly checking my phone and asked if I was okay. I told her briefly. She offered to have her husband come with me because he was big, loud, and could scare them. I thanked her and declined because I already had my friend and my lawyer. Before I left, she even pressed a bag of boiled eggs into my hand, telling me to eat for strength, because that day would be intense. When I got home, Whiskers was waiting at the door. I set my bag on the table and checked everything one by one. More than 20 transfer statements, credit card receipts with the mistress's purchases circled in red, the booking contract placed on top, the gambling debt statement tucked in the middle, the one that would hit hardest. I also found an old voice recorder and copied over the audio of Calvin's threats and the audio involving his mother and sister in case my phone battery died. I fully charged a backup battery and put it in my bag. When everything was done, I sat down on the sofa. Whiskers curled in my lap, purring softly. I stroked his fur. Strangely, I wasn't worried anymore. Before, just hearing Calvin threaten me would steal my sleep. But now, I was calm, like I was standing in front of a door I had waited 20 years to finally have the right to open. I messaged the hotel manager to confirm the ID badge. He replied, "Don't worry, everything is ready." I set my phone down, looked at the moon outside the window, and thought to myself, "You'll see. Your facade is about to be blown away." At 6 in the morning, I woke up. I chose a dark, elegant coat with a light gray sweater underneath. I didn't need to stand out, only to look neat and calm enough to say what had to be said. Before leaving the house, I checked my bag 3 times: transfer statements, credit card receipts, the booking contract, the debt statement, the voice recorder, the backup charger. Nothing was missing. Whiskers sat right by the door, rubbing against my shoes as if encouraging me. I stroked his head and whispered, "Mom will be right back." I arrived near the Willard Intercontinental an hour early. The lawyer was already waiting on the sidewalk with a black leather briefcase containing copies of all the evidence. A few minutes later, Sharon Price appeared. She even brought a small folding chair so I wouldn't have to stand for long. The 3 of us went into a nearby convenience store to sit for a moment. The lawyer looked at me and repeated the plan one last time. "In a moment, you'll follow the employee in, enter through the service door, and wait in the back corner of the ballroom. When the MC reaches the vows, you stand up, present in the exact order: booking contract, transfer statements, play the audio. Don't lose the rhythm." I nodded. In my head, everything was as clear as a map. At 10:30, a hotel employee came to meet me, a young woman in her 20s. She handed me a staff ID card and said she would lead me into a break room in the back. And when the MC began reading the vows, she would come get me. I followed her down the hallway. From the ballroom, I could hear cheerful music, laughter, and the sharp clinking of glasses, festive to the point of being almost painful, the complete opposite of the heavy bag in my hand. The break room was small, with only 2 sofas. The young woman poured me a glass of warm water. "Ma'am, don't worry. The director told me if anything seems unusual, I should call him immediately." My hands were slightly cold, but my heart felt strangely steady. The one who should be worried wasn't me, but the people out there, about to swear promises on a stage built of lies. I took a deep breath and suddenly understood. Today wasn't just the day I exposed Calvin. Today was the day I chose myself again. I used to fear crowds, fear the stares, fear being labeled a ruiner. But thinking of the $75,000 that had been transferred away, thinking of the threats, thinking of 20 years living like a shadow, I knew if I stepped back now, I would step back for the rest of my life. I placed my hand on the bag's clasp, like placing it on the thing pulling me out of the past. And right at that moment, the music outside changed. Around 11:30, the music shifted into a solemn wedding march. The young woman came back to tell me the bride and groom had entered, and in 10 minutes, the MC would begin the vows. I stood up, flexed my fingers lightly, and unzipped the bag just enough to pull the documents out quickly. Through the crack of the door, the MC's voice rang out warm and steady. "Before family and friends, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, do you both vow to always stand by each other and never abandon each other?" It was time. I followed the young woman into the ballroom through the back entrance. Everyone in the back was looking toward the stage, so almost no one noticed. I walked slowly down the aisle and stopped about 20 to 25 feet from the stage, just as the MC asked again, "Bride and groom, do you vow?" Calvin, in a perfectly tailored suit, was about to open his mouth when I spoke clearly. "I do not consent." I didn't shout, but my voice was loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "He can't vow. He hasn't even paid the full deposit for this party. So what right does he have to vow that he'll never abandon anyone?" The entire ballroom dropped into a deadly silence. The music stopped. Every eye turned toward me. Calvin's smile froze. He turned around, eyes wide, voice shaking. "Alyssa, what are you doing here? You said you wouldn't come." I took one step closer. "And you believed that?" I walked up beneath the stage and raised the booking contract. "This contract clearly states the total cost exceeds $75,000. The required deposit is $15,000, but he only paid $7,000, and to this day, he still owes $8,000. Yesterday, the hotel called to remind him and warned that if he didn't pay, the party would be canceled." I looked around the room. "He told the bride he'd give her a $75,000 party. He told everyone he was successful. But the truth is, he can't even scrape together the required deposit. If that isn't deception, then what is it? Whispers exploded. Monique, in her white wedding gown, went pale and grabbed Calvin's hand, demanding to know, had he paid in full or not? Calvin immediately pointed at me and shouted, "Lies! Fake contract! She came to sabotage this!" I pulled out the hotel statement showing the $7,000 deposit clearly recorded. Fake? This is the statement. Only $7,000 was transferred in. If you already paid the rest, show the transfer receipt. Calvin dug through his pockets, his wallet. Nothing. Right then, Loretta suddenly sprang up in the crowd, pointed straight at me, and moved as if to charge. The lawyer immediately stepped forward to block her, his voice icy. "If you attempt to attack my client, we will call the police." Loretta was stopped. She threw herself onto the floor, screaming and sobbing. But this time, nobody cared. Everyone was watching Calvin. I ignored Loretta and pulled out another folder of statements. From mid-May to October last year, he made 5 transfers of our marital property, totaling $75,000, into his personal account. I spoke each word clearly. Of that, $40,000 was used to buy the bride standing here handbags, necklaces, and a wedding dress. $35,000 was used to pay off gambling debts. The room erupted. Monique went ghost white, let go of Calvin's hand, and trembled as she asked, "He had lied to her. He gambled. He was in debt?" Calvin tried to explain, but he only stammered, sweat soaking through him. I took out my phone, played the recording of Calvin threatening me, and turned the volume up. "If you don't turn the cards back on, I'll come to your house every day and make a scene. I won't let you live in peace." I also made it clear that I had recordings of his mother and sister coming to my house to cause trouble. The sound of the vicious insults blasting through the ballroom shifted the guests' faces from celebration to contempt. One major client stood up abruptly, announced he was ending all business, and walked out. Others followed, one after another. Monique burst into tears, ripped off her veil, and threw it on the floor, screaming, "It's over! You lied to me! You promised a $75,000 party, and you don't even have a cent! You're a fraud!" She ran off the stage, her dress catching. She tripped and fell, and the white gown dragged through dust. Calvin rushed down to help her up, but Monique flung his hand away and ran off sobbing. Guests left the ballroom one by one, some even muttering, "Better not do business with a man like that." Loretta was still sitting sprawled on the floor, crying. Vanessa stood nearby, face drained, silent as stone. The MC stood frozen with the microphone in hand. The hotel manager stepped out and handed Calvin an invoice, the remaining deposit due, plus damages and costs for food already prepared for the tables that were now abandoning the event. Calvin stared at the ballroom emptying out, stared at the invoice, his legs turning weak, and muttered, "It's over. Everything is over." I looked at him and felt no pity, only relief, like a shackle that had locked me for 20 years had finally been removed. I put the evidence back into my bag, looked at my lawyer and Sharon, and walked out. I passed Loretta without stopping, without looking back. Outside the hotel, warm sunlight poured down. Sharon patted my shoulder. "Alyssa, you were incredible today. You exposed them completely." The lawyer nodded. "Your timing and rhythm of presenting the evidence were perfect. Now he can't deny anything anymore." I let out a long breath. I felt as light as a feather. 20 years of injustice dissolved today. The rest of my life would no longer revolve around Calvin and his family. I would work in peace, live in peace. This time, I live for myself. People say it's better to lose money than to lose honor. But today, I didn't just take my honor back. I will take back everything that belongs to me and let Calvin, Loretta, Vanessa, Monique torment each other. In the end, the only people who lose will be themselves. Leaving the Willard Intercontinental, the sun stretched my shadow long across the sidewalk. Sharon handed me a bottle of iced tea. I took a sip, the cool sweetness sliding down my throat, and it felt as if more than 20 years of bitterness inside me was melting too. The lawyer said he would reorganize all the evidence to request the court issue an enforcement order, forcing Calvin to return the $75,000 he had transferred away, pay roughly $7,000 in damages to the hotel because the party was ruined, and review all remaining undistributed marital assets, not letting a single dollar slip through. The three of us left immediately and stopped at a small soul food place, ordering 3 hot plates. No one mentioned Calvin's family. They weren't worth it. About 2 weeks later, the lawyer called. The court had issued the enforcement order. Calvin had 15 days to return the $75,000 and pay the hotel around $7,000 because the hotel had to refund deposits for some tables and clean up the aftermath. I asked, "What if he doesn't pay?" The lawyer only smiled. "He won't dare. His building supply business has already lost clients, and he still owes over $7,000 for inventory. If he doesn't pay, the court will seize the car registered in his name. At that point, he won't even have transportation." Later, neighbors said Calvin sold the car for over $12,000, split the money to pay debts. But it still wasn't enough to keep his old life. He moved into a small basement unit in the suburbs. People saw him at the market in a faded coat, standing a long time in front of the discount produce section. He tried to apply for delivery driver work, but rumors of cheating and gambling made no one want to hire him. His reputation hit the ground, and his future darkened with it. Monique ran out of the ballroom crying and never contacted Calvin again. Sharon's friend saw her at a supermarket in another town, wearing an employee uniform, pushing a cart, stocking shelves. No more sparkling necklace, no more designer handbag. Apparently, her mother scolded her harshly and forced her to forget the dream of living off a man and get a real job. There was talk that Monique started dating a guy who worked in the supermarket warehouse, an ordinary life. At least she no longer dreamed of a $75,000 wedding. Glamour built on other people's money collapses sooner or later. Loretta and Vanessa didn't do any better. Loretta's $600 monthly pension used to mainly support her son. Now Calvin was drowning in debt. Vanessa had no more place to leech from, and they turned on each other with blame. I once saw them arguing right in the market. Vanessa snarled, "This is all because you spoiled your son." Loretta cried, "If you didn't drain your brother's money every day, would it have come to this?" Passers-by watched, and no one intervened. After that, Loretta ended up in the hospital, but Vanessa couldn't afford to pay. Calvin had no money either. In the end, Loretta's longtime friends collected money to help. After being discharged, she lived quietly in the old house, no longer carrying the aggression she once used to press onto me. And me, my life slowly got better. After 6 months working at the organic grocery store at Eastern Market, the owner raised my pay to $3,000, put me in charge of purchasing and inventory management, then hired 2 part-time employees so I wouldn't be so exhausted. More and more regular customers came. They said the produce I chose was fresh and priced fairly. Sometimes an elderly person forgot their money, and I would only say, "Just take it home. You can pay next time." Little by little, I became like family in the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson often brought homemade cookies. Mr. Thompson liked ripe apples, so I set some aside just for him. When I had free time, I went walking with Sharon, and on weekends we sometimes took trips to nearby areas. Last autumn, we watched red maple leaves in the mountains. Standing in the cool wind, I felt my heart quiet in a way it hadn't been in forever. Whiskers got noticeably plumper. Every afternoon when I came home, he waited right by the door, rubbing against my leg as if welcoming me. A house that once echoed with arguments, now held only silence. I used to think freedom had to be an explosive moment, but no. Freedom arrives through small things. A paycheck with my name on it, a dinner where no one insults me, a night without threatening phone calls. And I realized, Calvin didn't only take money, he took peace too. But now I was taking it back, day by day. When Mrs. Henderson told me her daughter was being treated badly by her husband, but was too afraid to resist, I told her 5 things, drawn directly from what I had paid dearly to learn. 1. Always keep documents, receipts, and housing paperwork. When you need to protect your rights, that is the strongest evidence. 2. If you are treated badly, don't endure forever. Endure once, and they will push further next time. 3. Women at any age should have a job and money of their own. Financial independence creates a voice. 4. Good friends are worth more than gold. If I hadn't had Sharon, the lawyer, and the store owner, I wouldn't have been able to stand back up. 5. If a marriage can't be saved, don't cling to it. Cutting losses is better than letting it corrode your entire life. Mrs. Henderson nodded. You're right. Enduring doesn't make anything better. 6 months later, Sharon invited me to a networking event for women entrepreneurs at Busboys and Poets. There I met women from all kinds of industries, and each had a story of standing back up on her own. Mary Ann, a bakery owner, smiled and bragged, I divorced 5 years ago. My ex said I could never succeed alone. But last month I opened my 3rd branch. That night, walking home through Capitol Hill, I looked at the Capitol building glowing on the hill and thought, maybe in a few years I would have my own store, help other women, and maybe even open my heart to love, not because I needed something to cling to, but because I was confident enough. But for now, I was already satisfied. A stable job, loyal friends, a safe home, whiskers waiting at the door, and most importantly, I had myself back. And so, my dear friends, Alyssa's journey has come to an end. An ending where justice is no longer an abstract concept, but a clear, tangible reality. The betrayer falls from grace. The greedy pay the price for their own greed. And the woman at the center of this story, brave, quiet, and steadfast, has finally found true peace in a new life she controls with her own hands. But this story doesn't stop at a satisfying reversal of fate. It leaves us with something far deeper, the extraordinary power of preparation and determination. Alyssa's victory did not come from luck. It came from the bookkeeping ledgers kept carefully through the years, from receipts that seemed meaningless, and from a single record button pressed at exactly the decisive moment. Those were the silent weapons she quietly accumulated through long years of patience. And when the limits of endurance were finally reached, those very weapons became undeniable proof, shattering every lie and every ounce of arrogance carried by her ex-husband, Calvin. But let's pause here for a moment. If we had to ask, what was Alyssa's greatest victory? It wasn't the moment she stepped into the ballroom and made the entire room go silent. It wasn't the look on Calvin's face as everything collapsed, and it wasn't the whispers spreading through the crowd. Her greatest victory was the quiet mornings at the organic grocery store, the warm afternoons in her small home with the old cat curled up beside her, the feeling of freedom, knowing every dollar she earns carries her own name, because Alyssa proved something simple but deeply true. The best revenge is not making someone else suffer, but building yourself a life that is many times better. Alyssa's story leaves us with a profound lesson. Never underestimate the silence of a woman, because when she decides she will not endure anymore, her strength can move mountains and fill oceans, and the light of truth, sooner or later, will defeat every shadow. If you enjoyed this story, let me know. Which city are you listening from? I'd love to meet you in the comments. And if real-life stories like this touch you, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next stories about justice, about choices, and about people brave enough to stand up and take their lives back. If you'd like to support me even more, you can send a super thanks. Your support is the motivation that helps me keep bringing you deeper, more honest stories. Thank you for listening all the way to the very last second. I'm looking forward to your thoughts. See you again in the next life story, with all my respect and affection.